Aloha, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. Thank you for spending your lunch hour on Valentine's Day with us. I'm very privileged to introduce Dean Camille Nelson, who became Dean of William S. Richardson School of Law during the pandemic and has helped navigate the law school through these unprecedented times. Dean Nelson, prior to serving as Dean of our law school, served as Dean of American University, Washington College of Law, and Dean of Suffolk University Law School in Boston. She also was a professor at Hofstra University and a visiting professor at Washington University in St. Louis School of Law. Her scholarship focuses on health law, criminal law and procedure, comparative law and leadership through the lens of cultural studies and critical race theory. She was named among the top 35 women in higher education by Diverse Issues in Higher Education magazine and was listed as one of the most influential people in legal education by the National Jurist. And she also received the Paul Robeson Distinguished Alumni Award from the Black Law Students Association of Columbia Law School. We are so privileged to have her here. She's going to be discussing the William S. Richardson School of Law in the post-pandemic market for legal education. That's a mouthful, but if you have never had the opportunity to hear Dean Nelson speak before, you are in for an incredible treat. She's a dynamic and compelling speaker, and we're so fortunate to have her at the helm of our law school. Please use the chat box to ask any questions that you may have, and we'll share as many as we can with you after Dean Nelson's remarks. With that, I'll turn it over to Dean Nelson.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, for your very, very generous introduction. I appreciate it. And great thanks to Pat as well for inviting me to speak. And welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. And I wish you a beautiful Valentine's Day. I hope you are enjoying this day. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us and to engage with me and the William S. Richardson School of Law. We're trying to touch hearts and minds at the law school. So I very much look forward to your insights and your feedback. So this is what I set out to share with you today. So with this in mind, I'll get started on the first, what I like to call the constellation of concerns, to situate the work we're doing at the law school within the universe that we are beholden to. First and foremost, the students, obviously, in the university, but we also are in conversation with our accreditors, both the Association of American Law Schools and obviously the ABA, as well as reporting requirements to the NCBE and the National Association of Law Placements as well. What I've put up in terms of the pie chart is the ever-shifting terrain of the US News and World Report rankings. And it's useful insofar as whether there's, as you know, a lot of conversation about whether the rankings will continue, whether people will supply data to it. They have indicated that they are going to rank us nonetheless, whether people participate or not. And what I've shown in the pie chart are the historic areas in terms of the methodology by which we are assessed, through which we are assessed for the US News and World Report ranking. Sometimes they increase the sliver, sometimes they decrease it, but I set it out because it's clear that there's a subjective in terms of peer assessments components and an objective component in terms of the information and the data that is typically submitted. So I just wanted to lay out our universe and the different dynamics, sometimes in confrontation, that we are seeking to simultaneously address. So with that in mind, I wanted to talk briefly about enrollment management. And I'm grateful to our team internally for supplying me with some of the data. This is available through LSAC, the Law School Admission Council. And in sum, we are trending slightly lower than the pandemic years, the height of the pandemic. This is us, like, hopefully you can see the little arrow that I'm using, the mouse. but we're higher than a couple of years ago. So just in terms of even reading some of the legal blogosphere today and the pre-law journal, we're up slightly over the pre-pandemic years, but down over the pandemic years, which frankly saw a significant increase in both applicants and the number of applications they were submitting. And many posit that that was because of the increased flexibility that all students had through remote learning, and the fact that many would-be law students could write the LSAT, for example, from their homes flexibly, because that was an innovation that took place during the pandemic years as well. So there was a significant increase, and now we're trending back to pre-pandemic levels, which means year over year, the numbers are down, right? We are in the far west and we are trending down, but trending down only insofar as the last couple of years are concerned, a little bit up over pre-pandemic years. So we'll see what happens at the end of the cycle, which typically ends towards the end of the spring, early summer. Curriculum, another area that I said I would speak to. My humble position on this is sort of focusing on core. As with exercise, core strength helps you be strong in lots of other areas. It boosts your ability to withstand and endure, and it boosts stamina in lots of areas. I tend to think that strength in core areas also helps strengthen expert in specialty areas. So we're really trying to double down through our faculty hiring process. The first year I was here, we were in a freeze. We are now in what's called a hiring thaw. And so last year we were able to recruit some entry-level faculty. And this year we are recruiting more. Just briefly, I ask you to please join the Richardson community in welcoming these wonderful new faculty members and in supporting them, and realizing that over their next several decades, they will obviously become the leading lights who you have come to know and love at the Richardson Law School. And so this is their moment to really come into their own as legal academics. We recruited on the left Professor Emile Loza de Silas, and she joins us having represented a number of tech companies, including Cisco, HP, Accenture. She founded the Tech Law Group in 2003. She worked at the US Department of Commerce. I won't go through everything, but she has a BS in tech, an MBA, and a JD from George Washington. She is teaching a number of courses, including property. Next to the right, we welcome back one of our wonderful alumna, Miyoko Pettit-Toledo, who many of you no doubt know. She clerked for a number of judges, including the Honorable Richard Pollack, and she also clerked with an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of Hawaii and the Honorable Susan Oki Malloy. She practiced at McCorst & Miller, Mackay & McKinnon, and then was the ED and managing attorney for Maximum Legal Services Corporation. No doubt you've come across Miyoko. She has been the recipient of many accolades, including Ones to Watch, and a Super Lawyers Rising Star recognition. She's an alumna, and she went to Harvard for her undergrad. She's teaching in a number of areas, including civil procedure. Then we have Derek Koanoi, who's also one of our wonderful alums, and he came to us from his previous service as a professor of practice at the University of Arizona. He will be teaching torts. He is teaching torts and a number of specialty areas. To the right, Camille Turkan joins us in the summer from Jones Day. Camille clerked for Justice Sotomayor, and she will be teaching civil procedure and administrative law. Melissa Stewart joins us from Georgetown, where she is a fellow and also an adjunct faculty member. She spent a number of years in private practice at Foley Hoag, and she will be teaching contracts and also in the international law space. And then last but not least, Randall DeFalco joined us first as a visiting professor of law and then as an assistant professor of law recently. He was a Fulbright fellow and worked for the Canadian Prosecution Service, Public Prosecution Service, and he is teaching crim law, and he also teaches crim pro. So these are some of our wonderful new colleagues, and we're really excited that they will also be joined with a number of recruits who we are in the midst of actually hiring and interviewing, including today. So we're hiring in legal writing space and for Kahuliau as well. So when I talk about curriculum, I don't want to give the impression that a lot of thought is not going into this. A great deal of energy and thought is going into curricular planning, for example, and we have retained for our second stage of strategic planning, Professor Lauren Robel, who is at IU Bloomington, and she served as the dean at the law school for a number of years there, and also as provost emerita. Many of you know Lauren. She has a long history here in Oahu, and she spends part of her time here. So we're really grateful to have someone of her stature and experience supporting us through our strategic planning process as we try to envision and plan for the next 5 to 10 years, especially as we go through our next ABA site visit, for example, when we're joined by the ABA and the AALS in the coming years. So I think crucially, it's important to note that we are refocusing on our student support. I don't know that we have it perfect. We are working really hard to get this right. I think we could do more in advising, and that's our plan, as well as in wellness, and I'll speak to that. We are continuing to support our students, as we always have, trying to be more deliberate in supporting their experiential opportunities and outreach opportunities, including sending them and supporting some of our students in going to the last 2 COP conferences. So we're grateful for those of you in the community who have supported us in supporting them in terms of funds. We are grateful that one silver lining of the pandemic when we weren't in the building was we could improve some of our tech without too much disruption. So we have in the same time been intentional about being more porous, bringing the outside in and the inside out to you all in the community. We have also been trying to make sure that our classrooms stay competitive and appropriate for the time and for the student expectations. So when you come and visit with us, you'll notice that we have tried to upgrade as much as we can, and we're still in the midst of that, in construction, as it were, in some spaces. Crucially, in terms of student support, we have partnered with Barbary after a competitive RFP process to try to figure out how best to support our students in terms of their bar success, meaning bar pass, licensure. And this is just a part of an email. It's very wordy, but I want to just share with you that I am personally involved. Our administration is personally involved in 2 things: trying to build bar awareness so that students are not confused or surprised by what will confront them 3 or 4 years hence, and 2, bar support. So they're aware of what they're going to face, and then we do our best to support them in being successful when they sit the bar exam, hopefully on the first time, on the first occasion. But if not, you'll see, for our students who did not pass the bar, I was particularly emphatic that we were going to try to reach out to them to help them for their preparations for the next time they sat. So we have done probably definitely more than we have ever done to support the students. And we continue to build in this area with our partnership, and also by just having some designated folks in faculty in the area. Garrett is one of them. He's an alum, and I will tell you that Garrett is super hardworking. He is here. I have to tell him to go home sometimes at night. He is working with our students night and day to support their bar and academic success. And I was able to recruit one of my former colleagues from when I was on the East Coast, because we are not alone in wanting to better support our students. And a number of schools have already been down this path. So I'm grateful that Professor DeFabritas was willing to join us for the year to sort of look at what we were doing and to help us with best practices and to work with our partners, and most importantly, with our students in this area. And the reason I said that we could do more in terms of wellness and advising is this was just a word cloud from one of our mindfulness sessions with students. I'm a big mindfulness person. And many schools, including our own, are trying to be more intentional about myriad ways of supporting our students. This is a really hard time for many people, including students, and I think a great deal of empathy is in order. I was really grateful to see empowerment, accomplishment, knowledge, motivation, happy. I didn't expect to see that, but you also see just what students are going through in their moment of candor when we just ask for the word cloud. And I know we all did as well, but I also want to recognize that this has been, the last 3 years have been unlike any other in recent history, right? I mean, when you stop and think about it, which I don't think we've all unpacked, we've had an international pandemic. Our students and ourselves, we've probably witnessed more death, whether that's seeing it through social media or news feeds in terms of police interactions, school shootings at malls. I mean, we had a shooting at a university yesterday. Anti-Asian hate. There's been a lot, and people have seen it, right? We've seen it with our own eyes. And to act like these things don't impact us is, I think, to abstract humanity. Our students have also been through, as we all have, the insurrection, the impeachment, the inauguration, the war in the Ukraine, the withdrawal from Afghanistan. I mean, there's so much going on, and they have to study, right? They have to show up like you do and be on. So I just want to recognize this moment in history is a lot. And so we are trying to recognize that as this bar is, and I want to just commend the work of the Hawaii Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing. I mean, this is an epic report. I've only put some of what we've learned from this report and from the ABA and from other sources on the left-hand side. But wellness is a huge concern for all law schools, including ours, and trying to figure out how best to support this generation of students, knowing full well what we've all been going through and what they've been going through at a time that they're trying to be excellent students and be professionally prepared for their careers. So in the midst of returning to the core and trying to be better at bar support and advising, we're also trying to innovate because frankly, the world has become more competitive. And if we don't innovate and iterate, we're falling behind. It's that simple. So, trying to think about our own needs and unpack areas where we recognize our students and our community might want to be aligned in terms of opportunities. I was really happy to actualize the business boot camp with the support of this wonderful Richardson community. And this is about really empowering our students to greater financial and business literacy so that they are more competent and confident to engage in the conversations that you need them to engage in, whatever their practice area, and just recognizing with your support, so many of you are listed here, recognizing that economics, finances, business, commercial matters intersect with and are interwoven with so many areas of practice, even if you're not a securities lawyer or tax attorney. Having some basic rudimentary, if not enhanced knowledge in these areas can only help you. Special thanks to all of you in the community who supported our boot camps over the years. And we just had our third one on a Friday and a Saturday, and our students showed up. So they are to be commended as well for taking this seriously. I was really happy that one of our innovations was the Island Leadership Lab. And my thinking around this was business schools do a good job at basically embracing their students as future leaders, and they have curricula accordingly. Law schools generally don't. Yet, especially here, our graduates go out and they lead in multiple areas, right? They're called to serve and they're called to lead. So that notion of servant leadership is something that I thought we could help with, again, in sort of saying, we're here to help you. What do you need? And bringing best practice knowledge about leadership different types of leaderships into the law school. So we're really grateful that the Hawaii Leadership Forum stepped up and helped us with this 4.5-hour Saturday class. And again, our students showed up for this and they're remarkable. And I'm really grateful to the community again for volunteering their time and for offering their support with this initiative as well. At the same time, we realize we can't do everything. So we are trying to also give our students opportunities at other schools that will welcome us. So I was speaking with Judge Fogel. We're on a board together elsewhere, and he was telling me about this Berkeley Judicial Institute, and I said, so can our students come? And of course he's going to say yes. So there are opportunities, increased opportunities, remote opportunities for our students to be a part of conversations here and elsewhere. And so I'm grateful for Berkeley Law and other areas that are opening up these possibilities for our students. And we continue to try to celebrate and uplift existing programs like our January term. These are some of the fabulous faculty members who taught in our January term just last month. And so I'm grateful again for their coming to join us for the first time since I've been here in person. The last two since I've been here have been virtual, by and large, with only one person being able to make it or taking wanting to come and be in person. So I'm really grateful that this year we were all back together. And again, students were a big part of the demand for this. And I was grateful that they engaged so positively with the faculty that joined us last month. And thank you. There were a number of judges who joined us yesterday. We are continuing to now be in person with the programming that has long served our school. Heads up again, Gifford Lecturer happening next month. And thank you to the Carl Smith Ball community for supporting this effort. And Thomas Mitchell is a MacArthur Fellow who will be joining us next month to speak about heirs property and the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. And he's a fabulous presenter, and this work has been nationally recognized. So again, innovation and support of excellent traditions that we've had that really bring the community together and highlight the school. I would be remiss in not being really emphatic about our gratitude to Mr. Scheidler, to Jay Scheidler, for his support of the law school. He's been a long time supporter of the business school. So this was wonderful for us. It's allowed me to think differently about some of the areas where I think we need to be more competitive. A number of schools have really pushed into the tech space or tried to figure out what do the next 10 to 15 years look like. And so I'm grateful that Matt Stubenberg has agreed to join us from the Harvard Access to Justice Lab, thanks to Mr. Scheidler's support. And he's, look Matt up. He's done really excellent work elsewhere in looking at how the delivery of legal services can be enhanced and expedited, how the delivery of legal services can be made more accessible. And he's presently looking to partner with external community members, audiences, firms, advocacy groups. If you want to talk to Matt, let me know. He's really a wonderful person, and he's quite talented and gifted in this respect. So, and he is a lawyer who codes. So he has been teaching at my request our Coding for Lawyers class for the last, I think he's in his maybe this is the third time he's teaching it, but he's phenomenal and is doing great work. I'm also grateful that Mr. Scheidler's gift has allowed us to, again, have a director of international programs, and Professor Peterson, who I think many of you may know, has agreed to serve in that role as part of our recalibration of how we think about our international programs, how we think about our LLM program, how we think about our AJD program. So Carol is going to be really an important part of how we go forward in this area. On the horizon, so we're delighted that very shortly we'll be launching another new initiative with the support of the American Bar Association. The Hawaii Online JD Flex program is really an initiative in furtherance of our mission, which includes being particularly mindful of our Hawaiian state, and of course our neighboring island, all our friends, and the larger region. And speaking more intentionally to the region, also recognizing that when we started our evening part-time program, we had a particular focus on broadening access to legal education, promoting diversity in the bar and bench, and expanding opportunities locally and regionally. So this program, which is an evolution of our evening part-time program, will launch soon as we flip that to an online opportunity built from the ground up. This is not just flipping to Zoom like we're talking today. This is intentionally rebuilding these opportunities for our future students. And, you know, frankly, I think this is the right thing. It's the natural evolution. And I think it better situates us for the realities that all law schools are facing, which include, as you can see, a lot more students and prospective students are expecting enhanced flexibility and distance learning possibilities as they contemplate law school. And so the top left, you'll see the ABA section on legal ed and admissions conducted a survey a little while ago, and the vast majority of students who were polled want to earn more distance education course credit. There are a number of schools already in the space. This map is a couple years old. Santa Clara is now in the space. Indiana is now in the space. William Mitchell is now in the space. So it's sort of the moment we're in, because of course, a lot of the students coming in are digital natives. Many of us have been digitally acclimated, and we're learning as we go, and we're learning all the technologies, but they were born with the technologies and are a lot more nimble than many of us. So that's one of the big things we're doing. More to come on that. And when I showed you the constellation of concerns and the sort of space we're in, and I mentioned that there's a lot of subjectivity in there, in addition to the objective data that we feed to all of those, you know, accreditors and other entities to whom we report. The subjective dynamic necessitates that we share with people what we're doing through media channels, through social media channels, through LinkedIn. And so we're innovating in this area as well. We've launched a couple different outreach initiatives, the Connects, and the Kaukeakea, celebrating our faculty scholars, because that is also something that feeds into all of the rankings, but all of these conversations, and really just trying to be more intentional about celebrating the school and this community, because there's a lot to celebrate. And there's a lot to celebrate as we are trying to also make sure that we remain contemporary and recognize how people engage with us either through social media or through our website. So our website right now is being migrated. So this has been, you know, a while in the making, and we're trying to make sure that, again, when people Google us, we're putting our best foot forward. So hopefully this migration will be done in the next couple of weeks, but we're happy with how it's proceeding. And it will give us an opportunity to celebrate our 50th anniversary. So I just want to thank all of you for listening, for joining today. And I wanted to highlight that next year, really starting in the summer, marks the start of our 50th anniversary. So we are hoping to have a number of outreach events and celebratory events and just opportunities, again, to hear from you and to engage with you, and of course to ask for your help. I know we have a lot to celebrate. We also have a fair bit of needs, and the most important is to better support our students. So I look forward to hearing from you and to working with you and to doing all we can together to uplift this Richardson community. So thank you all. I appreciate your time and energy, and I will be quiet and answer any questions. And I can stop sharing screen if that's what should I do that?
I would keep that 50th anniversary.
Okay.
That's something to be proud of.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if there's any participants here who were part of that initial class, but I know I have at least one of my partners was, and the law school just has is such a tremendous resource and has such a tremendous history.
It's true.
So I guess you covered a lot of ground there. Deane.
It's like a first year class, right? But not this, no Socratic method though.
And you've been a dean at various law schools for the past 10 years or so. And so I'd like to ask, what are some of the biggest changes that you've observed over the years, and how do you think those changes are particularly impact us here in Hawaii? Sure.
So I think generationally, these students, people talk about millennials or Gen Zers, and of course, the average age of our students is around 27 at most law schools. So a couple different things. So that means people were born around 1996-ish or so. And again, came into a space where there's social media on the day-to-day, right? I mean, there is a heightened expectation that people are tech savvy. There is a heightened expectation that faculty are nimble with technology. There's also a generational shift towards wanting to be really impactful, right? People want to make a difference, and I think that's to be expected, given everything going on in the world, right? This is urgent for most people of these generations. If I zoom out the aperture, I think for me as an administrator, there has been heightened competition. And that's not just the rankings, that's heightened competition for students. They have more opportunities than ever to go to more schools than ever, the world over, with more support than ever, right? With more scholarship, merit, and need than ever. And that's the world in which we live, and to go to school in different ways, more flexibility, and hence the different modalities, whether that's asynchronous, whether that's synchronous in terms of online learning, or in residence. And that same hyper competition relates to faculty, and it's particularly acute here, no doubt for you all as well who are practicing when you're looking at recruiting attorneys. Hawaii is really expensive. So, the same dynamics that you might encounter in recruiting talent, we encounter in recruiting faculty who, of course, brilliantly deliver the legal education that uplifts our students. So for Hawaii, that's a particular challenge, I think. And also to retain our local students who have more opportunities than ever here, but also on the continent. And I think many schools look to Hawaii as a majority minority state to also think about, what does their diversity look like? So it's a hyper competitive place along a number of trajectories.
Thank you. I think, what your discussion about having to retain faculty in this expensive place, I think we all face it in our workplaces, and trying to keep talented attorneys here as well. I will take this opportunity to let everyone know that towards that end, the Cades Foundation, at least, yes, has pledged $500,000, the Cades Foundation term professorship, that is payable, I think, $50,000 a year over the next 10 years, to try to help the law school be able to compensate talented faculty and keep them here in Hawaii. So I hope things like that are helpful.
It's tremendously helpful, tremendously helpful. And thank you for sharing that as well, Rhonda, because when I met with some of your colleagues, and they asked, well, how can I help? This was an area that I said, well, we could really use your help with professorships. And that is really important. And what people should know is, we have one endowed chair. And that's brilliant. And we're so grateful.
And Michael Marks, that's the Michael Marks.
So that is the Kudo chair. And the rest are professorships that rotate. So as we think about this sort of, race for talent and to retain people, it's really important to think about what does that look like in a hyper competitive space where we have one of the highest costs of living in the country. I know median house prices just dipped slightly, but it's still close to $1 million, right? So where people tend to start to get recruited, and I admit that I was one of those deans who did this, was sort of look, oh, people might have kids that are starting to get ready to go to college, right? And, and that's going to hit. So, and are there other push-pull dynamics that might make people consider leaving, cost of living, for example. So this gift is tremendously important. And so we're immensely grateful. Thank you.
And I'm going to switch gears. There's a question in the chat box that I think is really interesting. The question is, as a female attorney of color, Hawaiian, and 2014 Richardson alumnus, who worked at a public interest law firm for several years and practiced in state and federal court, I was troubled by the amount of misogyny and racism I experienced personally or heard about. How can the law school help its students address this issue and be allies to colleagues?
Right. And so I'm gathering the call of that question is, upon leaving Richardson and going out into the work world, into the professional workspace, it's a bit jarring. And what I will say is we talk about some of these issues in the leadership lab. And I will say that I have personally shared some stories about my journey, and I hate hearing these types of things because it's so deeply painful to people, practitioners, anyone going out into the professional workspace to have to excel despite the way they're being treated. And it's another layer of work. And that's the sort of, the slide I had, carry on and act as if nothing is happening. I mean, that takes a toll on your well-being. Mm-hmm. And which then cycles into people's expectations of your performance, all the while you're being undercut. So I will say I understand, and I have a lot of empathy for it. I think raising that question in a space like this is really important, so other people hear that this still exists. And I think that is the faux, right? Mm-hmm. I think that is the fiction, that it doesn't exist, because it does. And it exists at the same time. This is a fairly recent grad, right?
Yes.
It exists at the same time that for the last 10 years, the growth in many law firms has been around diversity, right? Especially gender diversity. Yet still there seems to be a disconnect with the profession. And so I think it's a space where we can partner together and have these really, frankly, these real conversations. And we can try to support our students as best we can. And there's obviously the ABA has a lot of expectations now around diversity. And we are actually as a community doing diversity training. So it begs the question, right? How are firms and other practice areas, profit, for-profit, not-for-profit, government, private, meeting these same conversations? Just looking around at some of the firms recently, I mean, some firms have drop downs and speak about diversity. Some don't. Some entities speak about diversity and its commitment and its mission. Some don't. So it begs the question.
But I think what I heard was it's great to talk about it and be aware of it, because we do get complacent.
Yes.
Think that it's not happening when it is.
So just like with bar success, awareness that it does still happen. Mm-hmm. And I think support for people who are going through it. I mean, in the same way that there's that wellness task force, I mean, what can we do to grapple with these issues in this community? And one of the beautiful things about Hawaii is we're not even 7 degrees of separation, maybe 2 to 3. Like, we can actually do something about this if we want to, right? If we want to.
And along the same lines, one of the questions is, how is the law school reaching out to underrepresented populations, such as Hawaiian, Filipino, and what is the percentage of them presently in the law school?
Right. So part of the online JD with the hybrid option is to further opportunities and access and outreach. As has been said to me a couple of times now, even in the short time that I've been here as dean in this capacity, Hawaii is not just Honolulu. That's what's been said to me a couple times. So we're hoping with this distance learning possibility that we are absolutely more accessible, including to people in rural communities, and people who are not just in Honolulu. So taking that seriously. We have a number of pipeline initiatives that will, some will start this summer or next summer, and some have been going on for years, including outreach to high school students. I think we could do better in terms of our representation from certain areas, for example, Pacific Islanders and Filipinos, for example. And that's on us, right? And that's on us also to support those students who are looking at other schools because they need more support, perhaps some students, to come here, right? Especially given the high cost of living in Honolulu. So in terms of percentages, I don't know in terms of the breakout within, for example, the category that is listed in our reporting as Asian. It doesn't disaggregate, right? And that's just like Black, it doesn't get disaggregated, right? From whence does your Blackness come? Isn't like subdivided. But I mean, what I can say is we are often in the top of schools that are most diverse in the country, and pre-law today just ranked us with an A+. It doesn't mean we don't have more work to do. And some of that work is also around diversification of faculty, right? Our student body tends to be more diverse, like at many schools, than our faculty. But I think you saw in my slide, even in our recent recruits, we're working really hard to be intentional about being more inclusive.
And what are your thoughts about the LSAT? I know at the ABA, there's discussion about what role the LSAT should play in the law school admission process. And I know there's, I think, some school of thought that the LSAT creates less diversity in schools. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thoughts might sound conflicting. So on the one hand, I recognize that there's a lot of chafing around standardized tests, and some of it for very good reason. On the other hand, for many schools, including ours, the LSAT is highly predictive of a lot of things, including bar pass. So to the extent we have that 75% year over year cumulative threshold to continue to maintain accreditation, we don't have a lot of super strong predictors other than, with the LSAT, first year UGPA, a number of other factors, but it is important. The ABA at the mid-year meeting, despite the fact that there was a proposal to go test optional, it was defeated. So for now, both the LSAT and the GRE are the name of the game in terms of the standardized tests in play. There were 50 deans who did, including a number of deans of color, who did submit that they thought that a standardized test should be maintained, despite the concerns for how it interacted with diversity, because the alternative was perceived to be worse, meaning the vast array of challenges around just looking at UGPA or personal statements, because some people can afford coaches to help them with their applications, some people can't. There's grade inflation or perceptions thereof at some schools. How do you track GPA to GPA depending on all of the thousands of schools? So it's a really complicated question. And I have a lot of thoughts about it. I am concerned that to the extent we have the standardized tests that are the bar tests, some sense of performance possibility is helpful to the extent that threshold 75% is maintained. If that is done away with, I might be able to think a little bit more capaciously about the possibilities.
Okay, and then let's see. I'm looking for more questions. I think someone wants to follow up on the question about misogyny and what we're doing to help people address that in the profession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's interesting because, as a scholar, I write in critical race theory and identity theory, and we've been talking about this for as long as I've been in the profession. And, you know, this is going back to the 90s, the mid 90s, right? I remember when I was practicing in Toronto being asked, pardon me, to come and speak in Boston. And it was an ABA roundtable or session with, you know, Peggy McIntosh, I think, unpacking the invisible backpack, right? All the things that impact people differently in their lives. Unpacking the invisible backpack of privilege. And so the frustration that I have, that I think is shared by some of the people asking the questions, is we've done a lot of talk and made not a whole lot of progress.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think law schools can do that on their own. I think we have to do better, because the students of today become the lawyers of tomorrow. So it begs the question about what are we talking about in some of the classes? And I will tell you that part of my, you know, sensibility around this as a critical race theorist, cultural study person, but I teach crim law, crim pro, torts, legal profession. Those are my bedrock classes in terms of core, right? And it's not my sense that contracts doesn't have gender issues. It does. The question is, do we actually raise those questions when we're looking at unconscionability and the cases about why people pay more in certain spaces, right? How do we talk about certain questions in property, right? How do we talk about other issues in torts? I mean, I think these are important areas where we can have more fruitful, perhaps, conversations in law schools, as well as folks who are going to take feminist jurisprudence or fill in the blank specialty course that talks about gender issues or LGBTQI issues. Like, they are part of everything we do because these issues are part of society. So it's a challenge because people have to have the appetite to have that conversation, but we also have to raise it, right? Mm-hmm. And raise it in a way that we are then able to navigate and support our students through without being triggering. So it's important, and it's a challenge because the culture doesn't exist separate from the society, right? And law is one of the areas, but I know there's lots of other areas. So I think there's an opportunity for real partnership around how we do better together, starting in law school, but also this is all cascade. I mean, it all swirls together. Right. So we need your expertise to feed back to better prepare the students, but we also need to better prepare the students to not reinforce, marginalization. Right.
Yeah, kind of communication against all levels and being sensitive to the issue at all levels.
Right. And a commitment to do better. Right. And if people don't understand or aren't aware that these are real, it's not just people being hypersensitive, right? So, so how do we unpack that and do better together?
Switching gears, the next question is, how is the law school helping students to afford the high cost of tuition? Is there a tuition waiver for financially challenged students?
Yeah, so interestingly, you know, we are, and this is not to say that law school tuitions aren't high. Relative to our peers and nationally, we are one of the least expensive law schools in the country. That doesn't mean that tuition isn't important. It's very important. What we are trying to do, though, is to be more intentional about our what's called our discount rate. So when I have scholarships up here somewhere, yes, right? So need-based scholarship is important. We're trying to, and the university is very good with this, make sure we have sort of a foundational amount that we can give for students who are in need. And I am also actively with, you know, my colleagues trying to fundraise for merit as well as need. And since I've been here, frankly, there has been an increase in aid that's being given, and we're trying to, you know, be more intentional in terms of our financial aid optimization strategy to give more money out. It hasn't, frankly, been our culture. We've been more around formal equality, meaning, you know, sort of more equal allotments of money. But we're also trying to now financially aid optimize. So if people have heightened need and heightened merit, for example, they will get more. And so this is a bit of a culture shift for us. It's not a culture shift at some other places, but for us, we're trying to be, again, and this is part of being more competitive, is to meet our students' needs where they are, so they don't go somewhere else where their needs are being met because we're not meeting them. Even if those other schools have higher tuition, they also give more scholarship. So the discount rate is higher at those schools, so the student pays less.
Okay, that may have answered this next question. I don't know. How will the school work to relieve the financial disparity between in-state and out-of-state students? Out-of-state students pay twice the tuition and receive fewer scholarships.
Right. So, it's interesting because I think as I'm learning more and living more here, there is the reality is that out-of-state students do pay twice as much. And there is the witchy, the ability to pay in state, depending on if you're coming from certain areas in the country. But it is really going to be through philanthropy, because certainly it seems the culture, if not the preference, is to keep that sort of differentiation, which in fairness is not that different from most other law schools. But I recognize it does produce a hardship, perhaps definitely for students coming from out of state, who might not, for example, have family to live with if they so choose here. So that's where, frankly, your help can really help. Like, your support can make a difference, right? I remember being at one of my former schools where, there was some designated scholarships for people coming from different regions, for example, or people coming from, were kids of firefighters, right? I mean, you can do that, right? So that's part of the conversation that I would like to have more of, because what ultimately is the reality is there's the sticker price, and at every school, then there's the discounted rate, and that's what people and their families are paying. And we have to do more to increase our discount rate as we think about what the price is for the product, which is the legal education we're trying to deliver.
Thank you. Switching gears and going to the wellness issue, how can the school assist its students to anticipate the expectation that life balance is important, but 24/7 client expectations are more important?
Right.
And when you answer that, when you have the magic answer to that, can you let us all know, please?
For all of us, right? I mean, and it's, I'll just tell you, at my age, I'm like, do I ever stop saying like that I'm just striving for balance? Like, I don't want to give up, but I think it's like we're all working towards having, what is this work-life balance? And should we sort of recognize that sometimes you're going to be more balanced than others, right? It's temporal. It's depending on what's going on in the world. I'll be honest. I mean, I had no balance that weekend. I watched the killing of Tyree Nichols. And maybe I shouldn't have gone to an event after and thought I could be high performing. I was like a zombie. I was like a zombie. So anyone who engaged with me that night at this reception, some of you probably did, were probably thinking, what the heck is wrong with her? Because life is hard, right? And death is harder. I mean, it's sad. Some of us are grieving, right? So I think the more we can have honest conversations with vulnerability and share with the students, and you as practicing attorneys and judges, one, we talk about this in the leadership lab, none of us is fully formed. We are all every day, like, in formation, trying to do our best with what we have and the constraints before us. And no one is intentionally trying to make a bad decision, right? Or to hurt anybody. Like, I want to be generous in that. But lawyers work really hard. So I think so much of this comes down to, how can we help our students and our colleagues to better cope? Like, that's sort of where I've arrived. And, at one place where I was previously, I hired a psychologist to be our law school psychologist. I can't do that here, not yet anyway, right? But that doesn't mean that the need was not great, right? The need was students, staff, and faculty. So this is not just a student issue. This is all of us, right? We have been trying to be more intentional, and I think folks here are probably like sick of me talking about wellness or mindfulness, which is at least the little foray that I can control. And then folks can have to go to upper campus for counseling services and other types of support. But it begs the question, can we do more in-house, because lawyers have a particular constellation of stressors as we are servant leaders, and our clients have heightened demands because in many cases they're paying a lot, and or the issues are so great, and or they're in crisis, and in many cases this is their lives and their families and their livelihoods. So that's a lot to carry on one's shoulders. So the question again, how can we better support people, is live and is real, and to not have people think that we all have this figured out. That's the other thing I learned in the leadership lab from my students, is there's a sense that you all have it figured out. And so to the extent that, people are in law school thinking, oh my gosh, I don't seem to have it as together as fill in the blank your names, to the extent you can share your journey, we would welcome that. And because that's inspirational, and sometimes you can't imagine it if you can't see it. And if you don't hear that your life is not perfect, or that sometimes you struggle too, sometimes you think you're the only one. Mm-hmm. So I just want to be real about that, because it's what I've heard from our students as I've taught them in the lab and over the years in crim law or torts, is that humility and that candor can make a difference, because they then realize that they can too.
Well, you're preaching to the choir here, because I definitely think it's important to share your stories and let people know that everyone has their issues in trying to achieve balance. And I also think it's important to have a safe space. And it sounds like that's what part of what you're talking about is in the law school, to make sure there's a safe space to let people say what they need to say and get the support that they need. And obviously, I think that safe space should extend out into the real world as well.
Right. I think we can all commit to doing better here.
Yeah. Getting back to the money issue, are there scholarships or funds for students who want to work in the nonprofit industry post-graduation to help with living costs living in Hawaii? Are there any scholarships like that? Do you know?
I don't know that there are any specific that are designated for post-grad, for example, but we could do that together. Right? I mean, so the refrain that I've seen elsewhere has been there are some fellowships, for example. We do have some students who are as alums come back and work in, Kahuliao, or they work with ELP, and those are fellowships that are grant provided, and they work in spaces here around advocacy with our wonderful faculty. In other places, there's another model of sort of like loan forgiveness. So if you work in fill in the blank advocacy area, there is a fund that was philanthropically generated to help support the fact that you might not be making as much than if you were in private practice. And so that's a model. And I'm happy to work with anybody who wants to work with me on developing that possibility here. I don't think it exists yet.
Doesn't mean it can't be done.
Right.
And so just one more question, that's how can the HSBA continue to be helpful to the law school?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. Thank you for hosting me, first of all. It was really very generous of you and Pat, and I'm really grateful. And thank you for the people who came out to this webinar to be in conversation. I think the more we can engage together, the better, and the more feedback I can hear, we can hear, to learn what you're seeing will help us sort of backward design, and it will take time, but will help us backward design our curriculum, backward design our professional formation, and try to take seriously your feedback as we elevate the school. So that communication is really important. Obviously, your support, like Cade's, was tremendously appreciated, and our students are fabulous. Hire our students. I mean, they are tremendous, right? I mean, nothing helps pay back student loans like a job, right? And a good one. So so again, our students are tremendous. I have not been in any other school where I could say as wholeheartedly that, despite the fabulous students that I've experienced, you know, at a number of other places, these students are just extraordinary, and they're so deeply committed to the needs of this state. So to the extent that you have the capacity to mentor, support, and bring on in some capacity, that bodes well, I think, for their lives, but also the state, right? So that's, I think, the most clear example of planting seeds and having them blossom into beautiful flowers.
I love that analogy. So thank you, Deane Nelson, for sharing your insights with us. And thank you to all who have attended this session. The law school is a critical resource for our legal community, and it's imperative that we support its students and its initiative and its dean. So keep showing your love to our law school on this Valentine's Day and always, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Deane Nelson.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Stay well.